Hello, everybody, and we're live with another Creator Spotlight. I'm Hassan, your usual host for these interviews, and I'm here with my returning co-host, Joyce. Joyce, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joyce, also known as Minions Art, and I am a technical artist, and I make tutorials on shaders and 3D stuff.
It's amazing to have you again. We had you last, I think, on the Tunic stream.
Yes, that's right.
Yes,
very exciting.
All about scrolling textures and shaders, and there's going to be more shaders to talk about this time. There's a lot of fascinating technical work that went into the game we're going to look at today, and Joyce, you're going to help us make sense of it all, I think.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So today we're going to be looking at the incredibly high-octane fluid roller skating shooter made with Unity. Some people call it Tony Hawk's with a gun. I like to call it Doom with roller skates. We're looking at Rollerdrome by Roll7. We'll be diving into the level design process of creating the kind of skate park arenas in the game. We're going to be looking, as I said, at the technical art of the game. The game has this beautifully illustrative shader that's used throughout. And then we'll be looking at procedural enemy animations and the testing framework. So there's a lot to get to. So without further ado, let's look at the trailer of the game, and then we'll introduce the team behind it. So let's cut to that trailer.
In the year 2030, a new blood sport grips the globe. And in the arena, there will only be the victorious and the dead.
Okay, and we're back with the whole team here. Hey everyone, well, not the entire team. We can talk about the full team soon. But first, let's do our little round of introductions. Andrew, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm 10pn on Twitter. I'm the lead programmer on Rollerdrome at Row7.
It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. And Alina.
Hello. My name is Alina Sommer. I'm the tech artist on Rollerdrome. You can also find me on Twitter. I believe my handle is shown. It's Croft Artist. Check me out. Although I don't post much, but okay, yeah.
Follow anyway. Thanks, Alina. And Jacob.
Yeah, hello. I'm Jacob Mills. You can find me on Twitter at Jacob W. Mills. I mostly tweet terrible memes and opinions. And I am the senior level designer on Rollerdrome at Roll7.
I am following you on Jacob on Twitter, Jacob, and I'm seeing your daily countdown to the release of Rollerdrome, which it's
very exciting.
Everyone should be very excited for. It is very exciting. It's coming out in about a week.
Just next under, Tuesday. I think now.
Just under a week, next Tuesday. Okay, so everyone, make sure to go onto Steam and wishlist the game. We're going to drop a link to that in the chat. But yeah, before we get into sharing the editor and looking in editor at how the game was built, I'd love to get a history of the team, the game, how this all came together. Maybe Andrew, if you want to that off.
Yeah. So Row7's been around for a long time, like 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
If anyone knows the name, it's probably from Ollie Ollie, which was a 2D skateboarding game that was on Vita and loads of other platforms. We made a couple of sequels to that, and then late last year launched Ollie Ollie World on a whole bunch of platforms, which is a really great modern visual update to the game, but with lots of that core gameplay that everyone remembers. The Row7 that you know now is kind of like Row7 2.0. There was a Row7 making those Ollie Ollie games originally where it was very like contractor based, bring some people in, work together, make a game, ship it, and only the core people stayed together. And then about 2.5 years ago, they decided to stop losing all that institutional knowledge and start building up internal teams. And so there's 2 internal teams at Roll7. There's the Ollie Ollie team, and then there's the Rollerdrome team. They're both, although there's lots of people here who have worked with Roll7 for a long, long, long time, they're both new teams working together. And we're also a fully remote company, and we have been for multiple games as well. That's not really a pandemic thing. So all of the people, the Rollerdrome team kind of started building itself up right at the start of the pandemic. So we made this game without ever really having met anyone else in the team face to face. And we had to build all those processes and get to know each other and learn how each other works, all fully remote, which everyone had to go through the pandemic, of course. But we're sticking to that philosophy now post-launch, as the world opens up again, and staying remote first and figuring out how we make everything work. Yes, that's the history of Roll7, really.
Yeah, so you're maintaining it as a fully remote studio, right? Is there going to be some kind of physical space as well, or is it going to be fully remote or a hybrid solution? Or
so at the end of last year, as Ollie Ollie was coming out, we got acquired by Private Division, who's part of Take-Two. So we're now a fully paid up member of the Take-Two family, and just as equally as important as GTA and all the other, and Red Dead Redemption.
If not more, I'd say.
If not more.
Yeah,
that means the wonderful thing about that is that we have the Take-Two office in London as a resource, which is a really nice, really big office. We go there once every 4 weeks or so. We'll have a day there where everyone goes in, everyone travels down, and we can.
They've got the biggest marble boardroom table I've ever seen. It's incredible.
Fancy.
Frankly,
it's worth making the trip just for that table, right?
You wouldn't believe it till you saw it.
Now I need to see it. We should.
But we make accommodations for people who, like Alina lives in Germany, so it's very difficult for her to make those regular meetings. We make accommodations for people to be fully present in those situations as well.
Yeah, next week will also be my first week seeing that marble table. I got to say.
Very exciting.
And that's you're looking forward to that more than seeing the team, right? Just the marble table, key priority.
Well,
I remember first seeing glimpses of this project on Twitter in about 2019, just seeing a few GIFs from someone I didn't know named Paul on Twitter, and then all of a sudden one day I see this announcement. It kind of went silent for a while, and then I see this beautiful trailer for what the game had become. So how did that journey happen? How did it go from I think it was maybe correct me if I'm wrong, an individual person creating these little prototypes to being part of the studio and transforming in that way? Yeah,
so you're talking about Paul Rabbit, who's our creative director on this project, and I don't want to tell it. It's for his story to tell, really, but it's just a bunch of stars aligned, and Roll7 got to work with him. He brought his ideas, we brought the team, and then together we've gelled into this one entity and made an amazing thing together.
That's incredible. So I think we should dive it. Keep talking about the game, but while playing it. So let's share Jacob's screen, and you're gonna.
I will do my best not to embarrass
gameplay.
Myself.
You'll be
it's
fine.
a hard game, everyone. But yeah, I'll play.
It's amazing. All right.
This is the 4th level in the game. This is a mall level. It's where the game starts to get a little bit spicy.
Right. So for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, Jake, give us an idea of what the objective is and how the flow of the game works.
I know, Andrew, can you speak while I play? Because it's.
So it's a post-apocalyptic. We've always talked about it as this is a 70s action movie that you're playing. It's nice. Running Man, it's Rollerball, it's all these influences. This is a post-apocalyptic, post-corporate society where, there's this monolithic corporations taking over from countries, and then they're using blood sports to quell the masses' bloodlust and keep them under control. And Rollerdrome is one of those blood sports. And you are a competitor called Kara Hassan, who has entered the top tier of Rollerdrome for the first time. And in the sport, competitors roller skate around arenas, doing tricks for the crowd and trying to be as stylish as possible while engaging the house players, who are these other enemies you see around the level. and they're trying their best to stop you. So the aim of each level is to try and clear the level as stylishly as possible, and your score reflects how much the crowd has enjoyed your performance.
So you'll see we've got a combo meter ticking up on the right, and that's not to do with tricks. That's the number of people that I kill in quick succession. The tricks they serve two purposes, right? One's score, so you get scored based on the tricks you do, and you want to try and do a variety of tricks. The other thing is ammo. So if you see in the bottom left, I shoot a guy, use some ammo, I do a trick, I get more ammo. That's how the two interweave.
Yeah, one thing I noticed that I think was really interesting is that all the guns seem to have like a shared ammo, right? So it's not each individual gun has different ammo. You just have ammo in general. You don't have to worry about how much ammo you have in each gun. You could just worry about doing sick tricks and taking out enemies, right?
It's a pretty demanding game, so we do a lot of obviously it takes a lot of influence or an inspiration from other games, other skaters, other shooters, but you're doing both, and that's really difficult. Like that's why I said, Andrew, help me, because as soon as you start playing, it's like, oh my god, you're in there and you're like trying to concentrate on stuff, and it's an intense experience. But we do a lot of stuff to help you out in that way. So like one of them's like, you'll never see Kara bail. She never trips over, and you never have to like restart a run because she's fallen over. If you fall out of the map, there are some maps with like big ravines and pits, but you'll respawn back in.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if I made that point very clear, because I'm playing a game that's really intense.
I think it's extremely clear, so you don't have to worry about just bailing essentially like you would in a game like Tony Hawk's or something like that. Yeah. You can just fall and you'll do like kind of like a little roll, right? As you land.
Yeah, she always sorts herself out. She's a professional.
Oh, she knows exactly what she's doing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's incredible. So the next thing we're going to talk about, we can keep playing, I guess, and touch on it before we jump into the editor, is something that's obviously key to this is building these arenas, right? So building out the level design, right? Mm-hmm. And like some of these curves, like this curved ramp that you're jumping off of right now, some of the like just the, you can grind on certain platforms, which I'm sure you're gonna do for me right now. You're just gonna land on a grind, right, from a jump. Yes. Yeah, there you go. Amazing. Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. And so I believe you built a process to kind of make this easy, right? Or easier.
Yes. Yeah. There's a bunch of levels in the game, and they how much should I give away? There's 4 distinct biomes that we kind of flip between from level to level.
Yeah.
And some of these biomes are kind of skate parky, like this one. So you can see that we've got you learn all sorts of words also working on skating games. So this is a fun box just underneath me with a ramp on it.
Oh, no.
These things around the sides aren't half pipes, they're quarter pipes. So I'm going to be monitoring the chat for anyone that gets that wrong.
Don't mess up, chat.
Oh my god, I died. It's a hard game.
I'm glad you died, because people get to see this cool like death screen where it zooms in on the enemy and then just rubs it in your face.
Yeah, really makes you feel things. Yeah, we've got that level, which is like a skate parky level. It's a more level. It's okay. So this is a perfect opportunity. I could just talk about this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got quarter pipes. It's got ramps. It's got fun boxes. It's got grinds, like you say. We've got other levels set in a kind of mountainous biome, but that's usually like in a lodge or in a ski lift or something. Right. It's those are also our kind of skate park style levels, but then we also have these big arena levels and canyon levels, which are different. It's like the arena ones are like, imagine a velodrome, like big velodrome-y type things. Canyons are, we describe this in studio as canyony. So that's undulating rocks and like, kind of the ideal thing that you'd want to like skate on if you were skating in a canyon. So if I Shall I just cheat, or shall I actually finish this level? I can't remember how many challenges I had. Because I could just show you, or I could start booting up Unity and we could go in there. I need one more challenge.
To get to the next. Oh yeah, to show a different.
Hang on.
Use the assist.
Don't need them. Okay. But we do have a bunch of assists, which are really good. But
we just need one more challenge. Okay, let's see what. So there are a series of challenges in each mission that you can accomplish. So you can just finish the level by defeating all the house players. But while you're doing that, you can also be accomplishing certain challenges.
Challenges like that. Eliminate a house player while wall riding.
There you
And
and you don't have to finish the level to clear the challenge, which I was very happy with.
we're quite generous.
I
with that,
actually
yeah.
do love that. Yeah, that's very
But
forgiving.
I need to complete the level to unlock it. Oh my god!
Do you want to show
I will
it?
I will complete the level real quick.
Do you want to show it in editor or?
Yeah, but I need to
Yeah?
boot up Unity to do that. So
Oh, I see. Gotcha. Yeah. It's all
yeah.
good.
Sorry, I was in the middle of my flow before.
No, it's great. I mean, we can just look at it in the editor if you prefer.
Yeah, let's do that.
If you want to
That'll be
boot up the
easier.
editor. Clearly, from looking at that map, there's so many different types of assets that you can. There's like I said, there's the grinds, quarter pipe, half pipe, all of that stuff. And we were talking earlier, and you were telling me about things. Some things just worked, and some things didn't work. Like you had to figure out what works and what doesn't work for, I guess, the physics and the system of the game, right? And I wonder what that process is like. Like, how do you define this? This is, we can have an escalator in the game and it's gonna work, right? But maybe we can't have this.
The escalators or travelators, they're a great example because they're a real pain to make like nice and smooth, right? So you're totally right. When I joined the project, we'd just come out of Greenlight and we were getting ready for Vertical Slice. So they had like the kind of game defined, it's a skater shooter, but that's new and scary and interesting. And we want to start making content for it. So when I joined, it was like, here's the thing. And it's like, oh my God, this is so cool. But how do we make a bunch of levels for this? So one of the first things I did was take one of the kind of gray boxes that the creative director had made for one of the mountain levels and kind of just polish that up. And that was a big learning experience because I kept trying to do stuff that I've done in other games that I've worked on before, assuming that those lessons would work. And, in a way, sometimes they kind of do. But this game, like, I can't stress enough, it's a skater, it's a shooter. It's not a skater or a shooter, it is both. And that is like so different and weird.
Comes its own thing.
It so is. So it's something I kept trying to do. Like one of my big level design secret tips that anyone can just steal is that, like, if a level's boring, just add a load of verticality to it and it like all of a sudden becomes really interesting. I tried to do that in Rollerdrome and it works to a point, but Rollerdrome isn't like a game about, it's not a platformer, right? We're not getting from A to B necessarily. Obviously, like, there's big platforming elements because we're jumping, we're grinding, we're doing wall rides and cool stuff. But that's not, navigation is a huge thing, but it's not like the main thing. Like I say, it's all a split between the navigation and the shooting. So having big verticality, like really big, is fine, except it means the player can't see the enemies can't see the player. And a huge part of the experience is having that pressure applied to you. So you saw, like, I was like dodging rockets and sniper lasers and stuff, and that's where the game gets really fun, when you're kind of spinning all these plates at once and figuring out what to do. But if a sniper can't see you, because the big wall in the way or something,
right,
it's just not going to work. And
you lose that intensity.
Yeah, it's just not. The game's fun when you're under pressure, and we need to allow that pressure. So, like, another one like along that line is like cover. I had just come from working on like shooters for a few years, and like third-person cover-based shooter, right?
Oh yeah,
and obviously cover is a huge part of that. But this is not that kind of game at all. But even in a game like Doom, there's elements of cover. There's pillars, there's walls and stuff. Like, the player is kiting enemies around. You're strafing. You're backpedaling. You're figuring out which weapon to use and how to manipulate that stuff. So even in those games, there's cover. But again, that doesn't really work in Rollerdrome. Again, because enemies can't apply the pressure. Players can't survey the arena. It is challenging because it means that we kind of want a lot of the level to be very open. And so then how do you kind of make distinct spaces when you're adhering to that kind of rule, which is really, not overpowering, but like it's a big thing. It kind of takes away half your toolkit almost when you realize that that's, yeah. But
and
we achieved that, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And is part of that because a lot of the enemies are not so maneuverable. They don't move around as much, some of them. And so if you are behind cover, they would just have really difficulty accessing you.
As far as I understand, there were a lot of tests done with enemies that chase you. Again, like imps and stuff in Doom. but it ultimately doesn't end up working because then you kind of turn it into any other shooter where you're cutting enemies around and you're strafing rather than skating. And there was back and forth even later on in the project on like the camera and stuff. And I was like really hoping that we could like get a more shootery style camera, but when we had that in, it just eliminates the skating element and it's not as cool. It's not as, it takes away the uniqueness of the game and it makes that skating aspect harder as well, right? So it's always a trade-off. So yeah, there's a little bit of also we're a small team, right? And we can't be debugging like monstrous AI all the time. So we've got a couple of enemies that chase you a bit, but most of the enemies are they stay in place once they spawn, but it's all feeding back into the game loop, which is that you are the badass in the arena, you're closing the gap. And that's what's cool in the game. And that's what we want players to be chasing. And it means that we spawn the enemies in waves. So if you play the same level a few times, you kind of get the cadence of it and you start learning your favorite routes, right? And figuring out the way that you want to tackle stuff. That ties into stuff like there are collectibles in the level to collect combo tokens and the trick token. And so you can, you start into a point where you're like tying them into your route because they up your combo or complete a challenge, which is, like your overall goal. And just a very cool game. It's a very cool game.
It is a very cool game.
Is the screen ready to jump to? Just want to...
No, Unity, I'm afraid, is importing stuff. I don't know if anyone has any tips to speed that up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In chat, let us know. From what you're talking about, so like you have to strike this fine balance between it being a shooter and it being this skating game, right? And I feel like it definitely hits that where you can jump in, take some enemies out, then have some breathing room to jump, do some tricks, get your ammo back, get back in the action. And there's a really, as you said, like if you're being chased all the time, you wouldn't have any of that breathing room at all, and you wouldn't have those moments where it's like, okay, I'm going to do some tricking, I'm going to have some space and get back.
There's like definitely an alternate timeline where we make that kind of game, and there's an alternate timeline where like, so it's like drawing contrast from Tony Hawk and stuff, because obviously I joined the studio and I played Doom again. I love Doom 2016, and I played Tony Hawk's, and I was like, oh, what lessons can I learn here? And all the lessons were wrong, as I was saying. Like I tried to do all the wrong things, but that's fine. That's design. Our creative director and game design lead and stuff are all very patient and very good at giving that direction, so that we eventually honed in on it. But yeah, Tony Hawk, they have these the levels, apart from like the first one, end up being quite sprawling, and the game there is complete the challenges and do it in a time limit. Do it in 2 minutes. You've got 2 minutes. Do as much as you can, and that kind of time pressure to like just do a run and you in 2 minute chunks, that is really essential to the structure of that game, right?
Right.
So we don't have a time counting down. We did end up implementing a par time to encourage players to go fast.
Yeah.
And there's some speedrun challenges as well, which are really cool. And then the combo meter mechanic, that's always counting down, and you want to keep your combo up. So it's like, yeah, you want to get in the rhythm of shooting guys, doing tricks, shooting guys, doing tricks, shooting guys, doing tricks, and keeping that rhythm up and never stopping. Yes, Unity has loaded now if we wanted to go to it.
Amazing, great. So let's jump to Jacob's
I can't remember what incredible segue I had lined up because that was like 5 minutes ago.
I just find it's good to just shout segue when in doubt.
Segue.
There you go.
I believe it, right. What we were talking about was the difference between like skate park levels and other levels. So what I'm showing here is a level about halfway through the game. This is our vertical slice level. This is what I was like brought on to like have a go at, right? We had a rough version of it, which is kind of in line with what you see here. It had 3 islands. It had 1 island with a rooftop bit and a inside bit, and a cool tower in the background as well. That was, that's cool. Yes, and all these individual parts, like if I go to physics view and do this, whoop, we're in a volume, there we go. You'll see that these are just distinct pieces, right? We've got little pieces for each quarter pipe, pieces for each ramp, and I can show them in here. They're just taken from here. And it's kind of almost like a level editor like you'd get in another game, right? Like you can just plonk these in and ruin whatever you like, level you like with these pieces.
So you're snapping them together, dropping them in, going like, okay, I need this kind of curve, throw it in, and just like, yeah.
Pretty much
Little
exactly.
Lego blocks. Yeah.
If I wanted to, I could start ruining this level. I guess I'm not going to save anything, so it's fine. But I could do exactly that. Like there's one, and then it's like, oh, if we want to make a little U, you bring in another one, and this vertex snap stuff together, and then level design. We did it. They have a lot of controls on them, like for just like, the decks and stuff like that. But that's it. And this is drag and drop, and I can play this now, and she will grind on it. She will enter what we call vert state, where she goes up vertically, and it acts like a quarter pipe. It's very cool and very, very easy to like just get started, just making stuff like that.
So those controls right there, when you were making the changes to that ramp, are you swapping it out for another mesh, or are you modifying the existing mesh when you added that little platform?
As far as I know, if I find it in here, it all just lives in here, and all these do is just turn off and on the distinct bits.
Okay, so each prefab has a series of prefabs within it or meshes within it, and you're just selecting the one you like using the controls you've created there.
Yeah, but it being just in the inspector makes it very, very quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, like in conjunction with that, like we just use Pro Builder to just make stuff. I don't know what would be the best level to kind of show that off, but that's the process for these style levels.
Yeah, I was actually curious in terms of. Because like looking at this, it's kind of all already set up. So what would when you're starting from a blank slate, are you starting just by using Pro Builder and doing something really rough without these pieces, or do these pieces come in right from the start? What's your like quick blocking out process, I guess?
I wish there was a quick blocking out process.
Or what's your first pass?
Just because like making a level that's actually fun is like really hard, right?
Yeah, of course.
Let me choose one of these at random to show that off. Maybe this one. We'll see what's in here. I'm a big hoarder with my data, so I've got a lot of old drafts of old levels. So we will see. Right.
Oh, nice.
So in something like this is again just over halfway through the game. Mm-hmm. This is one of our mole levels, and this is kind of how it got started-ish. I mean, the real story is I made a whole different style of level, and we decided that didn't work so well. So just imagine doing that for ages and then just throw that away. We don't
feel like, nah.
But you can see this is a good case study for that. Like, I've got Pro Builder bits in here, and so we have a bunch of rules on how on what works well. So like one of them is like elements should be 13 meters apart at least, so that when the player comes down, they have time to make a decision and turn around and go shoot some guys or dodge an enemy attack or whatever.
Yeah.
Another one is like how she reacts to different angles of ramp.
Right.
And like that determines whether she kind of sticks to the floor or pops off by herself.
Right.
So a lot of the time as the player, you see a ramp, you want to jump. But like, at some point things become flat. I don't know how to describe that really.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really wonderful feature in the game, that it's like where I was just calling them free jumps when I was like testing it out. I was like, basically opportunities to quickly reload your ammo without having to think about it, right? You're kind of launching the player in the air by changing the slope a bit, right?
And we want to provide those opportunities. We want to keep, like, the highest priority is keep Kara moving. We never want Kara to come to a stop. Like I was saying earlier, she doesn't bail, but likewise, we design the levels like to have as few corners as possible, because we don't want you just getting stuck in a corner. We want you to keep moving no matter what happens. Sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was just going to say this is all designed so that, like, oh yeah, she pops off stuff. She's always in the air. But it's in player control, and you're doing that stuff. And I can just throw that together with Pro Builder super easily and get something cool pretty quick.
So would you like, let's say you built something in Pro Builder that you really liked and really worked out, and you're like, okay, this is the kind of like shape that I want to be using more often. Will you then go to the art team or something and request that to be a module or a piece that's added to your kit?
A lot of the time it was just the functional elements which ended up being modular. So ramps, quarter pipes, Yeah, everything else, it was like, you know, I mean, a floor's a floor. I don't know.
Yeah.
we didn't make modular floor bits, right? It was all kind of just made for the level, as needed. But like, floor's a floor. But like stuff like this, it's using the kind of kit pieces as a base, and then as a designer, as a conscientious designer, trying not to take the piss too much with your artists when you make bits that are kind of awkward like this. Like, oh, what is this thing? I don't know. But like, yeah, and it's all part of the process. So then I'm a big advocate of constant communication and collaboration. Like I'd be showing off these early drafts to those artists, and they would be highlighting problem areas and such as travelators, and we'd be figuring them out together.
Yeah, you were saying that was like a good example of something. So what was it about the escalator that really like stood out?
I just don't know if I have the language to describe what a pain these are without having lived through it. This is basically a case where we kind of did an art, like, you know, like you do an art island to kind of prove out the art process. And then we were designing levels, and it was like, oh, we've got travelators. Cool. Let's use them as level designers. We see an element like that, we want to use it. Okay. Yeah. It means that we kind of did it backwards. So instead of like designing an element and making it perfect, we kind of like had a cool element and then wanted to retrofit it. Basically, it means like I was just saying, we don't want Kara to come to a stop. So we've got these walls here, which would be very easy to bounce between. Basically, there were a bunch of iterations. Now we've got great travelators, and I won't hear a word against it. They're very smooth. They're silky smooth. You can ride on top. You can ride between. You can grind on all of the grindy bits. But yeah, it's something simple like that is what trips you up in a game like this, because Kara's movement is so reliant on the collision,
right?
And the collision just needs to be just so. So that ended up being where a lot of my time was spent later on in the project, was helping out that character controller as much as possible so that we could keep things smooth and keep things rolling as you play.
Yeah, as I was grinding through them all, I was like, I see why this is a travelator and not an escalator.
You wouldn't, should be tripping down. Exactly.
Yeah.
All these pieces, do they just work, or do they need like triggers on them or special code, or all collision?
I mean, I imagine there's a bunch of code behind grinds and quarter pipes, right? But everything else, Andrew, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Everything else is just wonderful character controller collision magic.
Yeah, it's mostly collision magic. So like going over that little air out when you go over a fun box at whatever it is, 27 degrees, and you get a little jump. That's just the character controller saying, "Where's the floor gone? What's the angle of the ledge that I've just gone off? Let's change state and go airborne here." And the quarter pipes, both in this kitbox format and in the other style that Jacob's going to show you soon as well, are relatively simple too. There's still no triggers. It's just collision tagging on the collision to say this is a quarter pipe, and then it relies on the fact there's a spline running all across the top.
Yes.
There's a spline running where the coping would be on a real quarter pipe that says which way the orientation of that spline is telling the game which way is out for this quarter pipe and which way is up, and then you can use that, go into vert state, and then you become the character controller starts listening to that spline, traveling along that spline, changing height relative to that spline, and then the moment you come back down, we transition you back to collision physics.
And when you say
very impressive,
it's amazing. When you say like getting out, is that like how to get out of the kind of being like moving along the spline, like the way like off of that?
We need a vector off the spline to say where is, like, if you imagine the quarter pipes going up against a wall.
Yeah.
We need to know which way is not the wall.
Got it.
So that we can then, like, the character's head will point out that way when she's invert. So we need that vector.
Got it. Makes sense.
I've been making a donut. I don't know if you saw.
I didn't.
Because it's weird.
Tweaking it.
But you'll see I can just drag that stuff in, vertex snap it together, and then unless something goes horribly wrong, it should just work.
And that's something you were talking about, like two types of, like, two ways of building the levels, one with the kits and then also the splines, right?
Yeah, it's because I've got big out of bounds zones, so I just got respawned in the wrong spot. Obviously none of this is rehearsed, right? So okay, Okay, I'll try that again, and
Don't worry.
if it doesn't work, I'll move it to where I end up spawning.
Yeah, I really want to see how this donut works.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll talk about those splines in a moment because they're very cool.
Yeah, I mean, we were just like messing with them, so yeah.
So yeah, this is like I've just made a circle, right? And this is bad level design. This isn't 13 meters apart, but it just works. It does just work, and it worked pretty good when I started the project. Oh, something janky there.
And so
yeah, she's not liking that join, but it did used to work.
And so if you do like a jump that's very kind of like horizontal, I don't know how to say it, like not just go vertically up, but move along without airing out, you'll just follow that spline, right? And stay on the ramp, on the donut.
There she goes, yeah.
Yeah, like just like that, exactly.
A natural curve through the air, but yes.
Which means that we don't have many such curves in the game. We try to avoid them. Funnily enough, in this level, in the final version of this level, there's some, I don't think they're quite as extreme as this, because this is still just a draft, but like most of the time, you don't notice it because most of the time you're looking across the room and shooting some dude that's trying to shoot you. Yeah. So yeah, should we talk about splines?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Seemed like a good enough segue.
That's a good segue, I think. Yeah, you did it. That was a good one. Segue.
So yeah, we got these skate park style levels, but then we've got some other levels. So let me show you the final level, and then I can show you the kind of draft of it. We've got in here. So this is actually one of the last levels that I made, which means that I was kind of a pro with the tools by the time we got there. It's also the second level in the game, so we intentionally did that where it was like try and make a bunch of the tail end first so that we can come back and make the start of the game with all that knowledge. And this is the fruits of that. So as you can see, we're in a beautiful canyon.
Nice. There we go. We finally made it to the canyon. It's extreme.
Yeah. And you can
I love
see
the coloring on these levels. They're incredible.
All the art is so beautiful.
So beautiful.
So I'm proud to just be associated with the artists in the studio. Yeah, you can see the kind of shape of it is like a big spiral.
Yeah.
That was, I don't know, that was the sketch that I made, and then I made it in here, and that was more or less it. And if I go into physics debug, you can see like how it's made.
Nice.
This is all one big thing.
Yeah, as opposed to the last one, which was like kind of patchy because it was all the different kit pieces. You can see it's just one blue collision there, right? So that's a singular mesh.
I don't know how you'd make something like this with kit pieces, really, because we wanted to capture that feel of. We wanted these to feel natural.
Yeah.
And natural skate parky.
Right.
Just organic.
You suspend your disbelief, and you're skating here, and it's really cool. So yeah, everything's smooth, and everything like you see. There's a really gentle upward curve on this one.
I think it really works. It's like they sculpted the skate park out of the earth, right? Like they kind of like
or like it was here and they just added in a cool grind rail.
Exactly.
There's a really good Red Bull video which went around the team. I don't know I think we already had the idea of doing it here, and then later on we found this like matching reference video. But there's a really good Red Bull video where they go out to like wherever this is, Arizona, and skateboard on these like.
It's so cool.
Sandstone, like natural sandstone quarter pipes that are there. It's amazing.
And there's a lot weirder kind of geometry in real life than what we've got in this game, because it ended up looking so sci-fi that it was distracting. Like if we had like, we're not going to be able to do it justice describing them. There's just a lot of cool rocks out there. Okay.
Yeah, like loopings, rock formations and things like that.
You're in little caves and stuff. Yeah. So yes, here we are back in the archives, and this is like a more or less the final draft version, but you can see it's a little bit rough around the edges. But this is what this kind of level looks like behind the scenes, and as I was building it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, is there anything calling out to you that you want to like?
Yeah, I would love to see maybe if you can walk us through how, like building a spline ramp and what that process is, and how that mesh is generated. I'm actually really curious about that as well.
Let me just copy the floor and do a fresh one. So we've got this tool, which is called the level design tool. Mm-hmm. Guess what it does?
Tell me.
Helps you level design. It's a very good tool. So you saw that it was where we had all of the kit pieces before, and you can filter them and stuff, and it's all very cool. But we're ignoring that now. We don't care about any of that. We're looking at splines, and I know what I'm looking for. So we've got a big list of different what we call profiles, which are different sizes of things. So if I get the kind of Canyon quarter pipe up here, you can see that it's kind of squished compared to this more standard quarter pipe.
So this is like a cross section of the ramp you're trying to make, or the spline. Yeah. Okay.
These big pink bits are that cross section.
I see.
And I can edit them, which I'll do in a moment. But for now, if we just grab this guy, it's all done with curvy and a lot of like magic on top.
Curvy spline from the asset store?
That's right.
Okay, cool.
I've been recently working with another set of splines with Unity splines, so all of my muscle memory is going to be off. So if I make any huge fumbles, that's why. But yeah, you can just draw stuff and it just works.
Amazing.
So you can get something rough but playable very quickly, which is super cool. And like you can imagine as a level designer, like that's so valuable because you can just, oops, there we go. Let me do that. But you can just kind of get going and you can just do stuff.
And so, you can adjust it after the fact, right? Like it's like just as you would adjust splines usually.
So I accidentally made an extra bit here, but I can just drag that around and play with it, and it's very cool. There's a million controls on here. I mean,
does it automatically generate the rails, like on the tip?
Yes. Sadly, this looks like something that kind of fell apart a little bit as we approach launch. So you can see that it's generated it in the wrong spot.
I see.
So I'm just gonna delete that real quick. But we've got controls on there to regenerate that. So there it is. Nice. It's back.
Cool.
There's a lot of controls on the splines themselves from Curvy. Sorry, who did I just speak over?
No, I was just going to say we should. I wanted to name drop Bill Lowe, who worked on a ton of these tools. One of my programmers worked on a ton of these tools with Jacob.
One of my heroes.
Shout out Bill Lowe. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bill Lowe, if you're in the chat, say hi. If you're watching.
Yeah, working with Bill was excellent. He's got such a great mind for tools, and the entire team is great. Honestly, like in terms of like me as a designer saying I want to do something and then being able to do that thing, it's
that's just the best when you get exactly the tools you need.
Yeah, totally.
So when you were talking about that pink cross section, so are these meshes generated essentially by I guess replicating that cross section and then generating meshes between each of those cross sections? Is that kind of
that's my layman's understanding of it? Yes. Okay. I don't know if,
that's pretty much
okay, good.
That's it. Okay. Do you want? Is there anything to expand on that, or is that Andrew? Or
there's no, it's like relatively straightforward. A lot of the complexity comes in from there are various modifications you can make. Like you can, I don't know if Jacob's got it ticked here, but you can have the quarter pipe snap to ground, so you can raise the.
I can show that off. So to do that, first I need to reset the pivot on the thing, which is going to put it all underneath the ground, but that's intentional. Don't worry about it. But now if I find that, what's it called? Scale to ground. You saw it change ever so slightly, maybe, but now if I grab this one and just drag it down, you'll see that the shape at the end is just squashing.
Nice. Amazing.
And this is how we get those wonderful natural curves.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of work in that, and making sure the loops don't overlap, making sure we're generating the right collisions at the right points.
Again, it makes it just so easy to just make weird stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those tools that comes together really, really quickly, and then the last 90%, the last 10% takes 90% to just get it working.
I see. And is that things like this? Like
snap to ground. There's a bunch of other power tools in there, like chaining splines, like the Rollerdrome in Arena 1 is built from like 2 concentric splines before it goes down to the floor to get the like multiple cross sections.
Yes, that's how this one's built. So maybe it's not in this version, but I can show that. So it's let me show that real quick.
Yeah, please.
Assuming that we're talking about the same thing, Andrew, I'm just going to assume we are. I don't know if I've put this in the right place. I usually do this. Shall I not try and freestyle it on the stream, or shall I do it the sensible way? Yeah. So it's easiest for me if I kind of line stuff up like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this kind of flat bit like an extended decking on this bit, which means I want to line them up. I did practice this before the stream to remind me how to do it, but like, as you can imagine with people watching, I can't remember how to make video games.
We believe you worked on this game, Jake.
Yeah, that's how it's coming across, isn't it? It's like, no, I really did, guys.
No.
So if I line these two up and I set the pivot to be in the same place, and what I can do is each one of these objects, let me drag this down, has its own spline object, but I can delete that spline from the wall.
Okay.
And I can basically assign it in here like that. And that means that when I edit this spline, nothing will happen because I've skipped a step or something. Oh God, how humiliating!
No, it's. I think so. So I guess the concept is like you're building new cross sections on the fly by like, I guess like
linking
doing like a Boolean union on like meshes.
More or less, yeah. I do not know why that's not worked. I must have deleted something wrong.
Sorry, Joyce, you said so.
Oh, I just said you're linking the meshes together somehow.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Amazing.
Thank goodness. That would have...
Yeah, they end up generated as two separate... It's like they're two separate meshes. All we've done is make them share a spline.
Got it.
Right.
And that means that I can chain these things up together. So yeah, like Andrew was saying, some of the velodrome levels are like a ramp at the bottom of a quarter pipe that's got like a floor attached, and it's like these really big weird objects that I can make, which then I can edit arbitrarily as well. Like, it's just the best.
That makes a lot of sense, right? Because I'm sure there was a point where you were like, okay, I need to have the perimeter, like the wall and the environment and the ramp, and I need to line them up perfectly. And you were trying to make two splines that perfectly matched but were concentric. And you're like, I need this tool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very powerful. So I can, assuming that I don't mess it up, add in a wall here, like exactly as you're describing, like. And let me just grab that. Oh no. There's some attach that there. And then I just like make this really big. And then once this is sharing the same spline, I think I've done this right. I may have done this wrong. I'm pretty sure I've done this wrong, but we're doing it live. Which one is it? This one. Because I think I haven't lined it up properly. Yeah, but that's fine. I can just move. You just move the profile basically, and that's where it is relative to the spline.
Yes.
There it is. Now I've got a wall for my level. Job done. Nice. And I can just...
Now you can wall ride.
Yeah. Level design, video game development. It's done. We solved it.
And I feel like one thing I was curious about when I was testing it was there are certain things, mechanics in the game that make me wonder. I'm like, did the level design come first, or did this mechanic come first? Where when you jump off a ramp and you hold left and right, the character turns left and right, right? But when you press up and down, nothing happens unless you're holding up and like forward as soon as you launch off, as you're launching off the ramp, and that way you air out and you go forward, then you can wall ride off a wall. And if you want to flip, you would hold RB rather than up and down, right? Or whatever controller you're using. I was using an Xbox controller. So I wonder, was that because as you were doing the level design, you were putting these walls behind the ramps and you were thinking, oh, it'd be cool if I could jump to that? Or did the mechanic come first, and did you adapt the level design to that airing out?
Honestly, when I joined the project, the character controller was pretty nailed down.
Okay.
She was already doing all that stuff. So all of that was just tools in my toolbox. But I assume it's because that stuff's cool, right? I don't know, Andrew, if you've got any further insight. You joined before me.
Yeah, airing out into wall rides is a very classic skateboarder mechanic. Yeah. So that's definitely something we wanted to have.
It's the kind of thing you want. I made that wall too far away.
Extending your combos and getting your traversal
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like letting you traverse around the level without touching the floor.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the one thing I love about the game is that the traversal is not just for like, again, it's not just to get your score higher or to feel cool, but it's also because you might need to jump to that wall because you need to get out of the way of a sniper or something that's trying to shoot you. Every action I did felt like there were I felt like there was multiple reasons for my decision at any time, right? Even if the decision was as simple as I want to feel cool jumping off this ramp and doing a trick, but I'm getting ammo at the same time.
Sometimes I'm not gonna name names, but some level designers will just put bits in that are cool for little. There's not much reason to do it, but it's cool.
Hey, that's a reason.
And especially
for me, yeah.
in later levels, like there's a bunch of stuff like that. Like there's a lot of weird war rides, which are just really cool to do. And then you can kind of get it. I can argue there's a purpose. You get high, and then you've got like air on the enemies, and you can like take them out from a cool spot. And I can just say keep your combo going and stuff, but really, just because it's a cool moment.
Exactly. There are a lot of mechanics as well that I want to talk about, but I won't because I don't know what's in spoiler territory and what's not. So I urge everyone watching to wish list the game, check it out. There's so much stuff that you're not seeing here right now that's just incredible. So we're gonna drop a link to that again. So
just focusing on just the grey box kind of doesn't do it justice, because so much of the game is the enemies as well, the challenges as well, and like all that stuff is really integral, right? So
absolutely. I was wondering if you could jump back to the canyon. There's just something I wanted to point to with the art on the.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, and so when
sacrifice that spline, rest in peace.
Rest in peace, spline. When you look at looking at the ramps after they're generated, it looks to me like the textures and the shaders are automatically generated onto the ramps, where you see that like kind of illustrative style with the lines, the hatched lines, or I don't know what to call them exactly, but it looks like somebody's been drawing on your level with a pen, right? It was very kind of a comic book style, and I think. Yeah, I was wondering how that's generated, and maybe this is an opportunity to jump in and talk about the shaders for the game.
Yeah, I was gonna do a segue while looking at the
segue from you.
I had a terrible segue lined up while looking at the.
Do it anyway. This stream is all about segue.
The previous scene you showed had these lovely pink textures. I was gonna say there's my segue to talk about shaders, because it looks like a shader error. So
I see. That would have been better than what I did. Okay.
Just waiting to line it up. Anyway, so the game has an amazing art style with this edge detection and the cell shading and everything. And Alina, can you tell us a bit about the inspirations and why you chose the style?
Yes, of course. So Andrew has already introduced the game, the content of the game, the style of the game in general. It's a 70s, 80s kind of game in the dystopian future, and we took heavy inspiration from the same era of comics, of European comic book art, and especially French comic book art. So what you see there is heavily inspired by Möbius, who is a pretty famous French comic book artist. We have the classical comic edge detection, very thin, crisp lines around the shapes. A lot of these lines define the surfaces of the shapes, because otherwise we have only solid colors and a bit of cell shading. So we basically have shapes that are that don't have a particular surface on them, don't have a particular texture or material on them. They are just characterized by the shape itself. And then through cell shading, we add a little bit of depth. You have like shadows going down the curvature, so you start reading the quarter pipes, and then we have edges on top of the quarter, like drawn to the quarter pipes. So now you start making sense of the shape, like you start reading the lines that follow the curvature of the quarter pipes, and this is how you like piece together what kind of surface it is, how it's actually flowing. Sometimes we put like little scratches or holes with just edges on them, They simulate the edges simulate like what the texture could potentially be, the actual real life material of rock, for example. And yeah, it's basically a very stylized abstraction of canyons. Like I can also jump straight into the canyon level, because I was going to talk about that too. Jacob showed a little bit of that, and I can basically show you.
It's a really good point. Just on like, the game is beautiful, obviously, but it's all flat shaded, which as a designer makes your life a little bit hard when you've got to like, player like perception of the world is so important, especially in like the split second like combat decisions and stuff. If you looked at something head on and it didn't have any of that ornamentation that Alina's talking about, you couldn't necessarily tell the difference between a wall, a ramp, a quarter pipe, right? Because in real life, like how the shadows fall and the rest of it will like give you that information. So yeah, all that stuff was a lesson, and yes, that's why all our quarter pipes have stripes on them.
Yeah, this is the best example for that. One of the best examples. Like, if I was to remove the edge from this entirely, which I can technically do real quick. We have like those textures. Let me just. It's way harder to read. You don't really know how the curvature flows. It's just solid shape. So this style really lives from edges defining how everything is actually like shaped up in the whole level. And yeah,
there are a lot of times where you're upside down, so I'm sure it can be disorienting. So those curves help a lot. Yeah,
these are basically the main reason why we understand what's going on, right?
Without them, the levels just become a big blob of color, right? Like you can't tell what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So as you can see, this is quite illustrative of like it looks kind of like a comic book if you just look at it like that. And shall I jump straight into the renderer, or do you have any questions?
Yes,
please. All right. Just segue,
if chat if chat has any questions about the shaders, please drop them in, and I'll bring them up as we go.
All right, cool. So I can simply break this whole rendering down to 3 kind of core features, which were named already. We have cell shading, quite classic. Like if you look at those rocks, for example, the sun over there, that's the sun, quite obviously. You can see that it shines from that direction, and you can see shades going like here. This is just lightning being snapped based on a certain threshold. So you have lit pixels and you have shaded pixels. Quite classic cell shading. Where it gets a little more interesting is when I introduce the second core feature, which is gradient mapping. And if I click at this rock, for example, is it this one? I want this one. Whoops. Just real quick. My mouse is going insane. I actually need this real quick. So yeah. Ignore what I'm doing, I just need a piece of rock. So this is the material of that piece of rock. We have a gradient texture over here. You can see it in this part of the screen. The shader samples from that texture, and to kind of illustrate, to kind of show you how it actually samples the color. And artist from the team, thank you, Tim A, has prepared this simple yet effective insight into the actual 3D software. So I just showing you this screenshot. This is a simple cube, and this is just one of the gradient textures that we have from the game. So these textures basically have the whole color palette of a single level in gradients in the texture. So whenever they start a new level, with I mean the environment team, they will make a kind of master color palette consisting of gradients, and then they can export it. Like if we go back to Unity real quick, this is an editor in Unity that we can use. We can make those gradients, and each element will then translate to two side-by-side gradients on this texture, which can then be exported and, well, as I just showed, imported in the 3D software. And the UV process here is fairly straightforward, fairly quick and easy. You take your faces that you want to have a specific color. You flatten the UVs, you just place them on the brighter side, which is important, the left side of the gradient, so that here you can see this little line is actually the flattened UV that corresponds to this face of the cube. And here you can see this red line is actually this face. So you have just set up the very basic colors of your mesh. Congratulations. And then you can import it to Unity. And that gives you basic colors. So obviously there's much more going on here than just the very basic colors. That would be quite limiting otherwise. The second half of this texture, this is also where the cell shading actually gets a bit more interesting. It samples from the left side if you have lit pixels, and then it pushes to the right side if you have shaded pixels. So in this case, these rocks have quite, well, I don't want to say it's bright, it's not really that bright, but it's orange. The lit pixels are orange, and the shaded pixels actually correspond to this second gradient. So if I was to change that, it would change the shadows. Yeah, thank you. It would change the shadow colors of a great chunk of the level, because as I said, they, not all, but most of them sample from the same texture. There's just a very few different gradient maps throughout each level, and they are basically set up like this. If I was to change this instead, it will change the lit pixels instead.
So that's actually your material is sampling from this custom asset that is just generating it. That's really cool.
Yeah. The asset is the editor. It still exports an actual texture.
Oh, right. So so it's automatically updated. Yeah,
exactly. You can click export texture and export it as a PNG externally.
Right.
If you wanted to, like I just showed, to import it into Maya or whatever. So this is still a texture, a PNG, or I think it's a PNG. Yes, it's a PNG down the line. But these neat little editors make it quite easy to try a certain color palette throughout the level. It will change a lot of the colors at once, and you can easily go in and adjust just a little bit of the tone, or you can straight up change the color. Like
I can't imagine how much time the artist spent just like tweaking these values until they were like satisfied. I'm sure there were like thousands of versions. It's like,
I'm pretty sure.
It's just fun. It looks fun to do. Like,
it's very fun. Like, I was just like kind of rehearsing it a little bit for myself before the stream, and I was like, I wish I would have done this more often myself, because my work was not actually creating the assets, but it's a lot of fun for sure. That's the gradient mapping. Yeah, I can go through the shader real quick. There's actually more to the gradient mapping.
Yeah.
So as you see, these gradients are not just like two different gradients for light and bright and shaded pixels. They're also actual gradients from top to bottom. And that is because we not only move the UV, the point that we're sampling across the y-axis for shading or lighting, we also move it across the y-axis, because we have an offset texture as well. It's a feature of the shader. If I just take a look at this one, it's the preview, you can see this is the offset texture that is on the rock.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, if you like, you can see that it directly correlates here. What it does is basically it can push the pixels on the Y to sample from a brighter spot on the gradient or a darker spot. And this way you can get a lot more detail in it with just an additional texture rather than having insane amounts of geometry to cut everything, like to be limited to only faces, right? So that's one of the very core parts of the gradient mapping as well. If I change the tiling, you can immediately see it changes the offset here, and the edges align with that as well. I'll come to that in a bit. The last part that I would like to talk about before moving on to the edges here is the threshold. It's not used on this rock in particular, and but it is another kind of way to just not misspell threshold for once. Yeah, this looks pretty bad, but if I change it like this, change the tiling a little bit, so let's say 0, 1. This is just adding a certain threshold to the cell shading, to the
I see.
shading value itself, and this way we can shape up the shapes of the shadows as well. This is not used very often, but in certain cases we can use that technically to give this a little bit of more surface.
Bit of grunge, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
are the stripes, are they done in world space?
In this case, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You're being attentive.
so they're very easy to line up in that case.
Yeah.
All the rocks, you can just stack them, and they'll always have a really nice line.
Exactly.
Running around them.
Yeah, this is actually exceptional. This level, we decided to go for world space projection. So if I was to actually rotate this, you can see that.
Yes.
Yeah,
nice.
it is projected.
Yeah.
It is projected onto the rock. The reason for that is exactly what you said. Rocks are complicated shapes. They're a bit tricky to UV. They're a bit tricky to get those textures on. So we just project them in this level throughout. In other cases, it is much easier than that. So we don't have to do it all the time. Like if I look at this building, for example, we just purely artistically settled on a specific blocky architecture style. This is actually inspired by the brutalism architecture, which was quite popular in the 70s.
Yeah.
So we can allow ourselves to have very blocky, chunky shapes, very hard edges, and that makes UVing insanely easy here. Not that we need much of it anyway. We do have a bit of like tiny scratches on the surfaces. But yeah, the decision for these kind of shapes makes it easy, and well, we don't need world space projection in these cases, and most of the architecture pieces throughout the game are fairly blocky.
Right.
So it makes it quite easy to work
I find
with.
the architecture really suits the kind of regime that's alluded to in the story of the game.
The story part, yeah. It fits really well.
It's called brutalism for a reason, right? Yeah, that's I can continue with the edge detection. I think that's a pretty interesting point as well, now that I talked about gradient mapping and cell shading, unless there are any questions before that.
I'm just very curious how you set up the there's real-time shadows from the character, and I'm very curious how you set up the edge detection on the shadows.
Okay, cool. To explain the edge detection on the shadows, I think I also need to explain the edge detection in general, because nothing will make sense. So this is a bit abstract here, and I apologize in advance. I will do my best to explain this. So we have a post-processing shader that actually draws these edges, and it does that by sampling from an edge buffer, which is a separate render target, and we draw every single mesh into that render target, and then it will detect differences in values between the meshes on that render target, and will draw an edge here. And the way we control it is quite a little bit complicated in theory at first, but it's actually not that bad. So we have 3 channels in that edge buffer. The first one basically just draws the meshes in a solid color. And when the shader samples that, it draws an outline wherever it detects a change in value. Quite simple, right? It samples 1 pixel, samples the neighboring 4 pixels, and change in value detected, bam, outline. This gives a very broad outer outline. Then we add more complexity to that with another channel. This is the red channel of that edge buffer, and this is achieved by getting the vertex colors of a mesh. So we have a mesh, and let's say we take a look at this little barrel, because I think it illustrates it fairly neatly. So the asset itself, if I click on the asset here, this is the barrel. The flame is actually modeled into it's one of the earlier assets. This is the vertex size, yeah, pretty much the same. So the artist can decide where to draw an edge line by just having different values of vertex color. So when, for example, I want to draw an edge here, I know that this is one of the spots where this is shaded here around here. I want an edge. I will just give these faces and these faces a different vertex color. Then it basically does some math to get the grayscale out of it, and here you have just different values of colors, and it draws wherever it detects a difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you're giving it those colors in the modeling program.
Yes, in the modeling program, exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joyce.
Yeah, I was trying to summarize it. Every vertex in a mesh can have its own color, and this is separate from any kind of texturing. So
yes.
What you can do is in most modeling programs, you can just select a face and then flood it with one color.
Yeah.
That's what's happening here.
Yeah, exactly. That's how we choose that, how we do it. We can, select these faces, flood them in one color, flood the neighboring faces in another color, and where the transition is also the edge later down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for making that clear. Yeah. That's how we get the mesh information, but here's also where your question is answered, I suppose. You can see this particular shade.
Right.
This is actually the shadow.
So that's also being rendered into that vertex color buffer.
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, that's how it's done. The shadow caster renders it on top of that in the same channel as the vertex colors.
So. Then there's the lines from the texture.
Yes, the lines from the texture are they're a bit more difficult to understand at first as well. Like they're a bit more complicated, but this is essentially the texture buffer. It looks quite freaky. Let me zoom in. Like I have to zoom in for this to make sense. Yeah. Oh no, wait, this is the wrong one. This is the right one. This is the right one. Okay. Forget what you just saw. That was actually a spoiler. So you have these. These are the textures. They are sampled in a quite regular way. We render objects with this texture to the green channel of the edge buffer, and again the post-processing shader also iterates through that, and then it draws a line wherever it detects a difference in value here. So technically, it would draw a line around here, right. and these little lines here that'd be like a little edge sausage, as I call them. So this is also one part. Like this is also where the weakness of that system kind of comes in. We technically don't want this to be an edge sausage. We technically don't want this to be just a scratch, for example. Right. So how do we create single line edges with this technique? And for that we have another buffer that
Mhm.
is a mask buffer, and that is what I just spoilered.
Mhm.
So if you look at this, imagine you have a little edge sausage. If you now look at this part will erase a part from the edge sausage. So it will mask that out again.
Okay.
Can you switch between the two again?
Yeah, this is the texture. This is the mask.
Right,
Texture,
so
mask.
the bit that remains is like really thin then.
Yeah, the bit that remains is
Yeah.
this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's
wow.
perfect.
Okay.
Magic.
It looks like magic.
Yeah, it's the mask is actually also in this texture. This is the red channel, this is the edge part of that edge texture, and this is the mask part of that edge texture. So you can actually go into Photoshop and you can paint on this channel if you want to erase edges. You can paint on this channel if you want to add edges, and
So that has to be like really accurate, otherwise you still get blobs in there.
yes, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And how many of these textures, like, like, I guess somebody had to like go through and paint these on, right? Through a series of textures.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. A lot of them are fairly simple tiling textures that are just reused on the assets. So like this one is reused on a lot of these bits, and you have another one here which is just like tiny little dots and so on. That one's reused like 1 million times at least.
That one's in world space again, I imagine.
Those are the edge donuts.
These ones are not in world space.
Ones on the floor?
No, these ones are not in world space.
Oh, interesting.
They are actually, like, well, this is just a plane to begin with, so this is easy.
Oh, right, yeah.
But these are also not in world space. They are, they're simple enough to be just tiling faces like this. And you have this texture on top of that. It's not really that hard to, if I just show the selection wire, this is not really that difficult to UV.
No, that's true.
Yeah. So these are actually
Below in chat says edge sausage TM patent pending.
Yes, please. You heard it here first. I'm applying patents here.
Yeah.
It's a good word.
If you were looking for exclusives, you've got them.
Nice.
Amazing.
An original was created.
Yeah, so some other things we were going to look at were we're also going to look at some VFX, right?
Yeah.
I heard there were some explosions to look at.
Yes.
Yes,
So.
you might be right. So let me show you. I'll just drop this explosion in here, which causes an error. Just ignore that error. So let me show off this explosion.
Love it.
It's a little different each time. It's very voluminous. There's also a very slow version of it in the game during Super Reflex where it really shines. Let me just blow your mind.
Please.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting implementation detail, actually. Like, we found that Super Reflexes, I can't remember them off the top of my head, when you go super slow-mo, whatever it is, it's 8% speed. I can't remember the exact number. And actually everything really static. Like, if an explosion was happening, it would just basically stop, and the game looked really boring. So we have code in there that at runtime, if you enter Super Reflex, it actually speeds up the particle effects. It actually makes the explosions run faster, so you see some movement there. And that was a fun fiddly thing to get right.
Yeah, a little bit of cheating.
You don't notice it.
I love it.
Yes.
And so it's the same effect, but just slowed down, right? And you just made sure that the way the effect is made, it works just as well visually in slow motion, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. It's just slow.
Yeah,
it works. Yeah, let me show you.
got to be a lot of parts in that explosion, right?
Yeah, I'm really curious, to be honest.
It's a mighty explosion, but it's also very it's integral to the Rollerdrome experience. You see explosions all over the place. They usually fill up a big chunk of your screen at any time, really. Especially in the later levels, you cannot go without explosions. That would really surprise me.
Yeah.
And so there's quite a bit of resources dedicated to this explosion. It's big, it's mighty, but it also really has to be. So let me show you. These are the objects it consists of. If I turn everything off except for the base. Not so mighty anymore, right? Very boring, very boring.
Right.
So this is actually the base. This is what you see first, and you only see it in the first split second, really. It's just...
This is more of a poof.
Yeah, more of a poof. Yeah. Gets a bit more interesting if I when I add this, but I will not add this. Yes. So here we have trails.
Yeah.
Another particle system on top.
Now we have
Still
a bang.
this is a little bit of but here's where it gets where it starts looking a little bit kabushi, I think.
Okay.
So now you have a bit of kaboosh.
Yeah.
So this is another set of clouds following the trails as they go out of the center of the explosion.
Yeah.
And this big mighty part in the end, the grande finale.
Big kablam.
Yeah, the big kablam. You got it, Hassan, you got it. This is the big gassy, cloudy, kind of smoky part that stays on for a little bit. That also covers up the ugliness of the other ones. But yeah, this is the explosion that you will see most of the time. It's actually visually inspired by that era of comics and anime as well. Like if you've ever watched Akira, it's from the 90s, but it's still quite a good reference for Rollerdrome VFX. The explosions back then looked a little bit different. Even in the movies, they were actually more gassy. Like these days, you have a lot of fire and dark gray smoke and explosions. Back then, they used to do them a little bit differently. They had less fire, less heat, as I call it. Like the orange parts in here are just a little bit of heat in the beginning. Most of the explosions are actually quite bright, gassy smoke, and that's what we were inspired by and wanted to go for. That's why the hot part goes away fairly quickly. If I just slow it down again, you have it hover around for a bit, just for the boom explosion part, and then it's mostly smoke.
So it looks like there's some color mapping going on and a texture that's scrolling.
Yes, nothing misses your sharp eyes. Yeah. So let's take a look. Well, there's also the explosion radius. Just a little addition. That's fairly simple. That's just an indicator for the radius, the actual damage radius.
Kind of a functional component to the explosion, right?
It also looks cool as hell. Like.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
It's an aesthetic functional component.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. So let me just pause it. It's an somewhat impressive stage, just so you can look at it while also looking at the explosion shader, which is not this one, but this one.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
So the mapping that you saw is also making use of gradient textures, but in a very, very different way. In this case, I have a tiny texture. If you look at the resolution, it's 32 by 1. It's very tiny. It's just these basic colors, and it animates them across the explosion as the explosion expands. So the indentations in the clouds, they will start going yellow, then the yellow will expand towards the extrusions, and the orange part will show, and then the rest will follow. It's nothing too special. Like, this is how it looks if I animate it through.
I mean, you say it's nothing special, but it looks great. So
Yeah,
it's,
absolutely.
it's worth
I think-
talking about.
Very special.
I think it gets more special if you add those tiny tweaks to it, because
Right.
this kind of animation is actually not what you see. This is way too fast.
Yeah.
Right? We added another layer of control here, which makes it a bit more special. This is actually a custom curve
Oh.
that is
Oh, fancy. Nice.
passed. Yeah, that is passed to the shader. So in this case, this is the smoke. And the smoke should not have a lot of heat in it. It should be mostly smoke. So it animates away the smoke, the heat part, the first few hot pixels very quickly.
Right.
Then it slowly continues animating through the beige brown parts.
Okay, cool.
So we add that extra.
So like a sudden explosion and then the slow aftermath of the smoke like dissipating.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's how the smoke is. In the first one, you saw that is just yellow. At first, the curve looks a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because this is not supposed to be very gassy. It stays hotter for longer,
Okay.
basically. Yeah,
And so are you using these different explosions from the results of different weapons, or is it just randomized explosions? When do you use the different ones?
in general, we only have 2 prefabs.
Okay.
So
the two
all
that you
these,
just showed, yeah.
all these
Amazing.
come together. This is the regular one. I actually didn't show the other one, but there's a small one,
Got it.
which is the same but smaller. It's slightly different. So it's not exactly the same, else we would not have made another one, but it's very similar, and one was used for the grenade launcher.
Uh-huh.
Because at some point, you might know Hassan since you totally binged that game.
What are you talking about?
So yeah, when you shoot your grenades, it will play the small one, and other things like enemies or even barrels that are in the level, like the barrel that I just showed over here. If you shoot that, it will explode and spit out this exact explosion. And it looks random, like it uses a random seed, so it looks a little bit like different each time it happens.
But the curve is the same. You've maintained the same curve that you just showed us. That's not randomized, right?
No, that's not randomized.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same for each respective particle system that uses it.
Yeah.
Which in this case are 3.
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, 3 particle systems that are clouds with that shader, and then the trail particle system, which are these parts, is a different thing. It's the Unity trail module with a kind of width over lifetime like this, and it stretches a little bit. So this is just a slightly shaped up trail without any actual particle, just the trail of it, and it sub-emits basically these other clouds that follow it a little bit.
Okay. And what about the tip there? Like, seems like there's like a spear kind of tip. Is that like a?
Yeah, this is this curve here. Technically, if I was to stretch it out really long, it would look kind of like the tip.
I understand. Okay.
That's the term one. There's a bit of noise because it's also displaced using. Yeah, actually, I didn't talk about how they get the shape, their shapes yet, right? So maybe I should first tell you that one. But yeah, in the case of the trails, there's a little bit of noise that displaces the trails and makes it look a bit more drawn. So
yes, those are the details you're talking about that really take it to the next level. That's incredible.
Yeah, kind of noisy, kind of hand drawn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the actual shape itself comes from this texture. It's a Voronoi noise that looks like so. And each particle is actually a fairly low poly, mid-poly kind of sphere. To make it a bit cheaper, we use GPU instancing, by the way, because we have a lot of them, but GPU instancing makes it fairly cheap to render them all. As cheap as this can be anyway. And these are projected onto the spheres and extruded from the spheres. So you have a cloudy extrusion going on here. And since this is projected in world space, you get an extra touch, and I will show you by moving this.
Mm.
When these explosions expand, they move a little bit, and since this is based on world space, it looks somewhat natural, I want to say.
Yeah.
When they move outwards and change their cloudy shapes.
It also clumps them together in a sort of cohesive way because of they're all using the same noise.
Yeah, pretty much. So these are explosions.
There's one functional bit to the explosions that I really appreciate, which is because there are a lot of explosions as you're playing, right? And if you couldn't see through them, you would not be able to see anything at all, I think, right? So you can actually see certain you can see the barrel right there actually, and characters.
Great observation, because that was a whole
segue.
thing.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
a segue. That's actually a segue. Thank you very much. I didn't have to come up with this one myself. You did it for me. Perfect. So let's bring this barrel forward a little bit. It's clearly a star in this show today.
Mm-hmm.
So this is using stencil buffers. So the important objects that we want to be readable at all times, which are enemies, barrels, and the player. And projectiles that are being shot, like rockets, for example. Those bits have a special stencil buffer that just masks out a part from the explosion shader. It makes it draw a different color instead, and this is how that's being done. So if I was to
and just like so people are clear, it's because, as you were saying earlier, Alina, like so much of the screen can be taken up by explosions, especially later on. The game becomes so hectic.
Yeah. There's so many enemies in Out for Blood, which is New Game Plus. You have so much going on screen that it's just full of explosions. And this is how we make it more readable. As I said, all the points of interest, they are shown through the explosions, and
I find it's extremely effective, but also so stylized and adds so much to the experience. And again, goes back to the theme of I feel like so many decisions made in this game come from multiple places, right? Many layers to every decision, which works super well. So that was a great deep dive into the explosions. So now you can go make your own explosions at home. In the Unity editor, I meant.
Important distinction today.
But in addition to that, there's a few other effects that we were going to look at, right? Joyce, do you want to cue those up? What do you want to talk about next?
When you get into a perfect dodge in the game,
right,
you then go into the bullet time. Sorry, I forgot the names of the
super reflex.
You get into a super
dodge.
Reflex.
Then you reflex time. So reflex time is when you're just holding the trigger and everything goes slow-mo by default.
Yeah.
As you say, if you perfect dodge and then do that, that's super reflex.
And during a super reflex, there is a cool screen effect that changes the colors around, so you feel super cool. I don't know how else to describe it. Alina, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I can show that in a second. Actually, it makes more sense to just show it straight away once it's
Loads up, yeah.
Done being busy.
Absolutely.
But to talk about it a little bit in advance, it's a screen space effect, an image, a very classical post-processing image effect that applies a cold bluish kind of color grading to the whole environment, and makes the player really focus on just a couple of things that stand out. Like there are those sources of danger, like enemies, again, barrels, projectiles, the same things that would be visible through the explosions, those points of interest, they get masked out. So while everything else appears blue, greenish, grayish, very desaturated, very cold. Those appear hot in like orange tinted color, red, orange, yellowish. And the player is supposed to really focus on those. I don't actually know why this is taking so long to just play. I'm so sorry.
No.
That just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
So is this using stencil buffers again?
No. This is actually to mask those points of interest out. We since we draw them to the mask buffer for the edge masking anyway, we use another layer, like another channel from that mask buffer for this effect only. Because in the mask buffer, oh, it works fine. In the mask buffer that we mask the edges with, we only have 2 channels used. One for masking away vertex colors, one for masking away textures. Both of these are possible things. And one of the other channels is just used to render this too, and then the post-processing shader that is actually the same shader. This all happens in one go. The color grading and the edge processing happens in one go. It samples that, and as it has the mask texture available already to sample the edges, it uses another channel from that same sample to mask the enemies whenever super reflex is activated.
Okay.
So let me show you.
Gotta see this legendary super reflex.
This is how it looks.
Nice.
First time. Well done.
First time. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was impressive.
I will,
Actually.
I will actually do just a little cheat. Don't mind me. I just did a little cheat to be able to show it for a longer time. So now I have infinite super reflex, which
Nice.
I obviously never cheat with, just for the purpose of demonstration. I promise. And you can see the whole world turned gray, green, bluish. The enemies stick out, the barrels stick out. Kara, our player, sticks out, still visible with her orange-red suit. Another thing, which I'm not sure if it comes through the stream really well, but there is glitchy distortion happening.
Yeah, the chat will have to let us know if that's coming across or not.
Yeah,
So let us know if you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I will not be able to talk about that if that is not actually visible in the stream. But if you play it, you have a bit of distortion going on that just looks like grainy, noisy, kind of like an old TV that kind of flickers around a little bit. There's slight chromatic aberration added on top of that to just, make it feel like you are in a weird, highly perceptive slow-mo state, because this is what this is supposed to be. When you do a perfect dodge, your damage actually multiplies up by a bit. And you are supposed to really focus on the enemies. You're supposed to feel strong and wreck as many enemies as you can in that short amount of time.
Like all the audio is amped up, right? And all the like explosions and stuff, like everything's just like turned up to 11.
It's one of the most satisfying parts of the game. And I just don't want to give things away, but it just feels so good. And the way your weapons change.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you feel like a badass when you get the perfect option.
Yeah.
Yeah, talking about the explosions and the perfect dodge, if I do another cheat, excuse me, because I don't have the weapons unlocked and I don't care about unlocking them right now. So let's say I shoot a grenade over here like this.
Nice.
It has a bit more extra kaboom added on top.
Oh.
So there's more particles. If you pay close attention, there's more coming out of it. A little more.
And that just feel extra cool.
Just for the super reflex?
Cool. Yes, just for the super reflex.
Oh,
it's
I
not
love
there
that.
Otherwise.
Attention to detail. That's fantastic.
That's for the extra damage, the extra kaboom. And also, you just casually saw a guy flowing away in a slow-mo. I don't know if you paid attention, but let me do it again if I have ammo.
Yeah, people are saying they
No.
don't quite perfectly see the distortion effect because of the stream bandwidth, but another reason
They'll just have to play it then.
get the game.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Just buy it, play
Yeah.
it. That'll be that's better anyway than watching such
Yeah,
a stream. So there's
really
the guy.
you need to experience all of this yourself. Let's be very
100%.
clear. Yeah.
But, absolutely.
Wish list now.
Dropping a link in the chat.
I don't know if this one comes across, but there's another very slight effect, which is a slight fisheye distortion. So if I change the perspective a little bit. Yeah, I'm not sure. It might also just be lost in the stream, but it distorts the screen effect just ever so slightly to be focused on the middle of the screen a little bit and appear.
I think when you go into it and come out of it, that's when it's kind of most noticeable.
Yeah, that's exactly when that's most noticeable. Again, guys, play it.
Definitely.
They're so good at this.
Well, people are saying
I
it's
love it.
visible, so that's good.
Nice.
And then I think there is one more effect, right, that we're gonna dive into.
Yeah, there was also a question in chat about it.
Oh,
How
yeah.
did you do the shattering glass?
Ah, right. Conveniently, I chose a level that has a lot of it. So let me
Exactly.
just show this.
Literally dive into it, yeah.
Literally,
Let's
dive.
dive right in.
Okay, so if I dodge this again, so these are all glass panels. I can shoot through them,
Yes.
and pieces of glass will shatter. I can just go face through the wall, and they will shatter as well. They will shatter from explosions. This is how they look, and if I pause this real quick and go back to the let me do this. Go back to the.
I'm excited to see this. I was curious as I was playing how you pulled this one off.
Yeah, so this is the object itself. It's a lot of pieces actually. They are not numbered correctly, so don't mind the high numbers. But these pieces are actually pre-baked, so there's not special shader magic involved with that one just yet. If I take one of these pieces, they're actually about roughly this size. This is
Wow.
one of the pieces. If you touch them, it breaks away. They all have like tiny box colliders, simple colliders. If
Okay.
you write against them in that radius, it will crush them. And we added an edge texture on top of that to just make it seem more granular.
Okay.
So this is how we fake it basically. We fake it till we make it. And yeah, the moment it shatters, we also have a few glass particles, which is just a particle system. It's not the actual pieces themselves, and it helps sell the breakage of the glass because it does look like the glass pieces themselves really like shatter as you ride through them, but they just disappear.
Nice. So it's bigger chunks with the illusion of smaller pieces breaking apart from the bigger chunks, right? Is that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
That's pretty much that. For optimization purposes, it was quite obvious that we could not have this many little pieces.
It also
So we
kind
did
of
this.
it also makes sense. I feel like if with the kind of projectiles and trajectory of things that are hitting this glass, I'd imagine big chunks to fly out. So
That's true.
yeah, it works super well.
It's a very nice, convincing effect.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes from the previews was Eurogamer calling it, I think they said, the best movie glass since a John Woo film.
That's amazing.
Nice. Thank you.
That's high praise. That's great. And it's
Whoever
true.
wrote that, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that summarizes up the glass. Yeah, there's transparency and reflections going on top of that to make it look cooler. It's view-based reflections with just a few textures on top of it. We have, again, our best friends are gradient textures. This is a gradient texture that just so we get a reflection that is based on view space, kind of like a specular reflection. Then we map the gradients to it, similar to how we do it in the explosion, and the black parts would just mask the reflections away, and the white parts would show pieces of reflections, so it kind of stretched, warped around it like this, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is how you get those shinies. There's another little mask texture that is mapped to the glass planes that creates these kind of more natural, cracky kind of looking pieces.
See.
If you go here, this is.
Oh.
So the cracks texture is also used inside of that view direction thing, or it's a bit hard to see from the stream preview that we have exactly how it looks.
Yeah, it's a mask that looks like this.
All right.
That is also multiplied into the color of the reflection itself.
Oh, great.
So this is what you see here, just for more color variation and.
So the cracks are affecting the reflection, essentially.
Yeah, they're masking the reflection, you can say.
I love that.
Nice.
Okay, nice. So we're gonna go. Thank you so much, Elena, for breaking all that stuff down. First of all, that was amazing.
Literally breaking in this case.
Yeah, breaking.
Yeah.
Oh, we're killing it today, all by accident. So we're gonna go on a short break, about 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll be right back with Andrew walking us through the procedural animations on some enemies that we haven't looked at yet, and the testing framework for how they really tested edge cases for the game. I won't get too into it. Andrew will say it a lot better than I would. So we'll go on the break and we'll be right back. Stick around. And we're back. Thanks for waiting, everyone. So if you weren't with us before the break, we looked into the level design and the shader work on Rollerdrome. And now, as promised, we're going to be continuing by talking about the procedural enemy animations in the game, and then following that up by talking about the testing framework that was used to playtest and QA the game. So, Andrew, please take it away. We'll cut to Andrew's screen and we'll start talking about those enemies.
Yeah, thanks.
Which enemies are we looking
at? So most of our enemies are relatively regular humanoids, but we do have, as you saw at the end of the trailer, there we have the Mecha Brute, who is this little spider walking person. And remember, because this is the 70s, there's no AI, so it's driven by one of our regular melee enemies. What's the proper melee?
Grunt.
Proper little grunts driving it around.
There you go.
And when you see the Mecha Brute stomping around the level, you see it's got these like stompy legs that are going around. I'll just show you that running. And it's a little bit interesting how we set all those up, and I'll talk as well a little bit about how the enemy system in general is set up, because I think that's a little bit interesting.
Yeah, so you can show that off.
Its AI is just nakedly stomp towards the player. You can see he's got little leggies. His little leggies are going. He'll get to the quarter pipe and stop because he can't reach me. But you see the one leg is going to go settle high up the quarter pipe, and the other ones will settle down low. The enemy itself is just a single skinned mesh. Skinned exact same way as you'd skin a human, obviously, except with 4 legs instead. These are the bone structures are here. Oh, that's the armor. Sorry, each of the bone structures are here. So you can see they've got bones walking down to the bottom, to the ankle there, a shin, a knee, and a hip. And then we're using a package called Final IK, which includes these attributes that you can put on the bones here to say, don't let it rotate beyond these extremities. You can, if I put this in the right place, we'll come back to that. And then very simply, down at the bottom, there's one of these components from Final IK where we tell it, here's the hierarchy of the bones and how you set them all up and how they talk to each other. And then this script, the Mechibus leg script, is just moving that final, this bit, it's just moving that final ankle bone, and everything else is kind of figuring itself out. And all of that complexity is just coming from how those ankle bones are moving and when they're moving. So they've got right at the bottom, we've got grouped them into pairs. So you saw when he was walking around. I think I can just drag him back, and he'll try and walk forwards again, like a naughty cat. So you get one leg go, one pair of legs go, and then the other pair of legs go, and they're rotating forward to a point, and then leaving it there, and then rotating forward to that point again. On the leg itself, we've got this slight animation curve, so we can animate how it comes up and stomps down. And then that's basically it. It's a relatively simple setup, but it's really effective, just letting the IK do the work here. There's a little bit of work as well to center the height around the legs as they're moving around. And that's it for like animating his legs. The top half of the body just pivots.
Okay.
Just pivots to where it wants to point to. And then the arms are just their own game objects. They have their own meshes, and they'll detach and bounce around when they get shot. You see as well, some enemies, including the Mecha Brute, have these armor pieces. So you get them to a certain level of destruction, and the armor pieces will pop off, and you get to see more of the enemy exposed. And those, again, relatively simple. They're just a mesh collider on a certain layer that we then pop off and turn its rigid body on, and it will start bouncing around the level. Those are tied not necessarily to have you hit that piece of armor, but more how damaged is the enemy. So sometimes it looks a bit weird because you might shoot it in the head and a leg piece will pop off, but it works better when you do a big smack of damage into it. You see the stuff will start sprouting off. There's dice rolls to see what sprouts off when.
You can just say there's some kind of reverberation going on, right? That travels down into the legs. There's something going on there.
Is there any questions I can answer about the leg animation, or before I go into the enemy setup?
I was wondering, are they like the bones in there? Are they rigged? Are you like rigging things up in Unity? Is that from Final IK, or is that coming from the external like modeling tool that you're using to bring it in?
That's our modeling tool. So the modeling tool has all of the bones set up here correctly. We can go and see that, can't we? If I click on. No, it's not going to like that. Quit that. Maybe we can't see it directly, but you can. Yes, it's all skinned. If we drag that into a scene, then that appears with a replication of its skeleton coming from the external software, and then we just slap some components on it to make it move. Okay,
and then for just the AI in general, the enemy AI, I guess there are some like behavior trees that you used, and I think you used a tool for that as well.
Yes, so we went through a few iterations of how the enemies worked.
Okay.
This is the version that we settled on. We don't have a class hierarchy, so we don't have a base class enemy and then Mecha Brute derives some enemy. There's just one enemy script. And that's it. And it has some very high level definitions for what's happening here. Here's where it gets its health from. It gets its main health is from this component. And then they all have a behavior tree attached, which is node canvas. And if you're not familiar with behavior trees, they are exactly state machines, except flipped. So whereas state machine has multiple states with very few transitions, a behavior tree normally has very few states with multiple transitions, but the transitions are implicit.
Okay.
So this executes.
Sorry, what do you mean when you say the transitions are implicit?
Because you can be in this state over here.
Yeah.
And at any point you could jump to this state.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But you don't need to define an implicit transition. You don't need to define an explicit transition that says, I want to go from this state to this state. You just define the prerequisites for being in this state, and it will grab you out of that state and move you over here.
Got it.
I'm not going to give you a 2-hour.
No, that was enough. Trees. That was a great good clarification.
Yeah. They are really interesting. They're really fun to play with. It's very top down. So you start at the start, and this is a sequencer node, so it picks any of its children that can execute and asks them all to execute in turn. As long as they all pass, then it passes, and you can start composing stuff like that. with selector nodes and decorators and stuff like that. This is a selector node that asks any of its children to pass, not all of them, any of them to pass, and then it stops executing. We were trying to set up, the aim here was that the behavior trees would be something the designers can have a lot of influence over, and it's more defining the why of what an enemy is doing. Why is it coming over here to attack? And it might be, so it's going to be using its flame arms to attack. And the why is because it can see the player and because its timer has expired and because this cooldown has expired. And then these nodes are guarding against you doing two things at once. So you can only attack. There's an attacking there and attacking here. It makes sure you're only ever doing one of these at once. So the designers can come in here and understand why an enemy is doing something. They could potentially come and tweak these behaviors.
Yep.
But we're not getting deep down into the nitty gritty of like, point this vector over here and spawn this instance of this thing and do this thing. Like the how is happening in scripts, but the why is happening here.
Got it.
And then you see there's a whole bunch of scripts on this enemy for how it's doing. Like there's a rocket attack script here that's for when it's launching its rockets. And that corresponds to over here where it's rocket attack. Yeah, I was right next to it. Right here where it's saying Mechibus main body, fire your rocket at the player.
Right.
Nice.
And so that's it. So all the enemies look like that. You open them up, they got a behavior tree. They've got the whys defined here, and then they've got the scripts defined further down. But there's no central hierarchy. The other interesting thing we did was, and I should say, shout out to Sean Tromans, who did a lot of the setup for the AI, for the enemy systems here, based on a lot of work that Bill did, who we'd already talked to. All of the enemies have these scriptable object settings files. We wanted the designers to be able to play the game and be tweaking things as the game is playing, see that effect, and then be able to quit and preserve those changes without having a lot of overhead to try and make that work. So all the enemies have a settings file which defines some common stuff. So what can they do? This enemy can use nav meshes and it can gauge the player. What's the name of this enemy? But then also some specific stuff. So how many rockets does it fire? What's the attack range of the rockets? And then each script, the main enemy points to those settings files, and each script can get the settings out and get the exact things that it wants to get. So that's the enemies.
So I'm curious, this behavior tree, which is, I think you said from Node Canvas, right? Is that something, was the reason you used that to make it more user-friendly for the designers?
Yes,
Okay.
that was the intention. I wouldn't say it's one of the most successful parts of the project.
Okay.
Invariably, when programmers try and design systems to give to designers, they end up, especially complex like programmary systems, they don't never end up quite utilized the way you expect they're going to be utilized.
Right.
But yeah, that was the intention, is the designers will be able to own this stuff and maybe even get to the point where you could put together your own enemies by piecing together components from other systems and building your own behavior tree.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. And then once all that stuff is built out and ready to go, you have to test it. And so then you have the testing framework that you jump into whenever you want to.
Now that's what I call a segue.
No, I was that for you, Jay. I did that for you, Jacob.
I love it.
And I'm glad you appreciate it. Thank you.
So, some of you might be aware, Unity has a plugin called the Unity Testing Framework, which lets you run a whole bunch of automated tests in your game, lets you write and automate a whole bunch of testing. And we found this very useful. Look, like the main driver, the reason why we put this in the game was because of how complex our traversal system is. You've seen already the game being played that you can wall ride, you can acid drop, which is where you dive into a quarter pipe from above it. Yeah. You can go into vert from quarter pipes, you can grind, you can fall into a grind, you can exit a grind into a quarter pipe, you can exit a grind over a quarter pipe, and transitions between all these different states. It's extremely complex. And we were getting to a situation in the game where we would come to the end of a milestone and then say, actually, there's 7 days to go in this milestone now. We can't touch player physics anymore. If you've got a change to make to it, you have to put it into the next milestone, because there's not enough time for us to make a change and then make sure we haven't broken some other aspect of traversal somewhere, the way that you slide down a slope that you can't roll onto or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was becoming quite limiting. So we started writing a whole bunch of automated tests for how the player moves about the world. And that meant that we could safely make changes. And once we made those changes, run those tests and make sure the player could still traverse all those little edge cases. We don't have to wait for QA to get a build and then make sure QA test the vert into wall ride, into acid drop transition and make sure that still works. We could have it all done for us. The way Unity lets you do it is relatively simple. We're going to talk mainly about play mode tests to begin with. Play mode tests are where you have some script set up and it will launch the game and it will execute that script and then it will quit the game and say that, yep, that test passed. And they look a little bit like this. We'll look at vert tests because they are the most interesting. So it's built on top of a system called NUnit. Where's my little slide of that? NUnit, which is a publicly available .NET, very common .NET testing framework. So you're just defining a class with text fixture here. It doesn't have to have a base class. In our case, we've got some for some common utils. And then you'll have a setup and a teardown. If we go into the base class, you can see there's a setup here that just makes sure we've loaded the correct scene that we want to execute.
Could you zoom in a little bit more?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please. Thanks, Joyce.
So we've defined a scene here to say we're gonna do all our work in the vert test scene. So the base class here is just making sure that we load that scene properly, and then you make a coroutine that you tag with Unity test, and you get that. We'll come back to that one. It's super complicated, but from within that you can do your normal yield returns. We're going to respawn the player at a certain place in the level. We're going to enable some specific objects so that we can test against them. We're going to push off, which basically just pushes forward on this player's stick. And then we'll wait. In this case, we're waiting until the character has gone into vertical state. And then we're going to tap jump. Oh, well, no, actually, we're not. We are making sure until we've gone quite far up the slope. So we've gone 60 degrees up a quarter pipe. And then we're going to tap jump. And then we're going to wait until we're not grounded. And then we're going to try and air out, and then we're going to wait a little bit more. And then you have these really fluent asserts at the end of your test, which are the thing that actually defining whether it worked or not. So here we're saying we're asserting that the roller state is standard, that is not standard, that we're airing out, we've gone into the specific air out state. And what that looks like in the game, we were in vert tests here. What that looks like is you get this whole tree. These are all the unit tests that are defined in that file. Ignore these folded out ones, we'll come to those. And if we open vert tests, the vert test scene itself looks very weird. It's all this geometry from different parts of the game that we've decided are problematic. And then we've set up various spawn points throughout the scene for creating different tests in different positions. Each one of these, especially these big weird ones, are here because they were a problem in a specific level with a specific repo case where you had to be exactly this angle at exactly this speed and you get a problem. And the ability for us to pull them into a test scene and then set up a test that exactly replicates those conditions every single time was really invaluable. Our workflow became, can we reproduce the bug in a test before we even think about fixing it? Can we reproduce it in a test? Then we have just a very simple ability to double click on something, see it reproduced without having to go through the main menu, line yourself in the exact bit, do some debugging, and then we have that test already and we can check that test in and then everyone gets the benefit of that thing. So I've waffled on about it for a while. Let's see what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
You can just double click on anything in the test runner and it will launch every single test below that. So it's loaded the vert test scene and it's going to run through all of those tests and you're going to see the player driving around the environment, respawning to a new place, driving around again, respawning to a new place. And again, this isn't AI. There is no AI for Kara in this game for the player's character. It's just those manually written inputs of like push forward, wait 0.2 seconds, push right, wait 0.2 seconds.
Okay.
Because everything's deterministic. It works pretty well. So that one I specifically remember was these two are about airing out over very small asset drops. But you can see we're running through a whole bunch of different scenarios. Each one of these probably represents an individual bug that we came across.
I see. And you don't have to sit and watch each of these. If there's an error, it will be logged and you can check it after. So you can have this running on a computer on its own, and then you can come back to it later, right?
Yeah, in fact, you can see all these going ticking green now as we're running through.
Oh, perfect.
And then we use Jenkins as a build server, and Jenkins can load the game and execute all of these tests for us every single time we want to make a build. And it elongates how long it takes to make builds, but it also shortens, like it massively reduces the risk of you getting a bad build. You don't, you can just run, trust build server, trust Jenkins to run the game, trust Jenkins to find the issues. And if the tests are passing, the player traversal is probably absolutely fine.
And so that's how it worked out then. That's how it was most of the time. As you were making builds, you found that
yes,
it was pretty reliable. Amazing. Okay.
That payoff we got was, we were talking earlier about how we couldn't touch the player physics for 7 days before a milestone, and we got to the point where we didn't really care. We could make changes at any time, and we were confident that we had enough tests to capture all this stuff.
Nice. So you would make small tweaks whenever you felt like it was necessary without learning too much. Okay.
The biggest payoff was when we were optimizing right at the end of the game. We wanted to make a change to the physics update loop. How often fixed update happened.
Yeah.
We wanted to change that to exactly 60 hertz. It was 66 hertz for various historical reasons. Mm-hmm. And 66 hertz is fine, except because the physics update wants to run at a different rate to the frame rate. If you're running at a fixed 60 hertz, which you are on console, and the physics wants to update at 66, it's going to accumulate an error and eventually run two physics updates this frame, which is invariably going to push you down to 15 frames a second. So you're going to go 60, 60, 60, 60, 30, 60, 60, 60, 60, 30, 60, 60, 60. So it was a really frustrating kind of stuttery performance on lower M on 60 hertz platforms. So we were like, well, let's change the physics to 60 hertz. And this was a couple of weeks before sub. And that's a terrifying thing to be thinking about.
Right.
But we did it. We made the change. And it theoretically should be fine because the whole game runs fixed update.
Yeah.
All the physics, traversal stuff runs fixed update. So theoretically it should be fine. But you wouldn't know that it was fine. You would play the game and it would feel okay. But then, 2-3 weeks from now, you might find some corner case that you didn't notice. It's subtly wrong. And it was because you changed the physics update. But what we did was change it. And then we were able to run all the player tests. And some failed straight away. And we could then go look at, we spent literally, how fast it is. It's one text box to edit to change the physics update. We spent 2 days going through all those tests. This was mostly driven by Charles Alley, who's one of our coders who spent probably the most time on the player traversal. And he spent 2 days going through all those tests and being absolutely certain that the reason this was failing was because the physics had changed slightly, so the player was now 0.1 centimeter further away than it was expecting to be. This is testing a weird traversal bug when you're in slow-mo. This is going over tapered quarter pipes is something we didn't talk about. It's a whole nother topic.
Let's not.
Yeah, so we were able to go through that, convince ourselves all those test failures were just floating point errors that weren't impacting gameplay, and then make that change. And it turned out to be absolutely fine. But we couldn't have done that. I would have, as a lead programmer, I probably said there's absolutely no way we're making that change with 2 weeks to go, unless it's absolutely life-threatening to the project. But we were able to make it and be very confident about it. So that's where the tests came in really handy for the players. There's various other things. There's a couple of were you going to say something, Hassan? Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask for anybody who's kind of new to the test framework and maybe hasn't heard about it before. I'm wondering, when you're implementing this into your own project, how much is being taken care of for you, and what is Unity doing, and what are you inputting into the framework? What's the manual work you're doing versus what's provided from the tool? Unity's
doing a whole bunch of heavy lifting, all of the infrastructure basically.
Yeah.
Our build server can pass a command line param into the game that the Unity testing framework picks up. and recognizes what tests it wants to run, and then tells those tests to start running. All we're doing, our tests are basically saying, load the level, push forward on the player, load the level, respawn the player here, press jump. Everything else is handled by Unity, which is great.
Got it. And how is it aware when an error has happened? How does it know when, okay, this is not working the way it was supposed to work based off of the design intention?
So there's two things you can do.
Yeah.
Either you can have it just fail when there's any error in the log, which we do by default. But also these asserts give you really nice, fluid error message to say, because you can basically read this as English. Roller state is not equal to standard, roller state standard, and the system's able to also do that parsing for you and produce really legible error messages. So it can sometimes our debugging would turn into, let's make a really, really detailed assert on the end of this, or let's put some asserts in the middle of this test and then let the system run it for us. And maybe very occasionally you get inconsistent tests, so tests that work 99% of the time then fail. And so you would keep instrumenting that test to let you dive deeper and deeper into why it's failing 1% of the time on the build server, using these really fluid error messages that you can get from the assert system.
I think it's worth saying, like, for the rest of the team, for people like me, for designers like me, the experience was that this was just completely off in some of the land, right? And occasionally I would get atted. They'd be like, "Oh, the build's broken," and it's probably you. And it's like, "Oh no, what have I done?" And it would be like Andrew's describing. It would be like, "Oh, this thing is missing from this level, the set of this level, or whatever." And it's like, "Oh shit, I better fix it." And then I'd fix it, and most of the time that would be it. And it would be like, "Build's passing, great job, everyone wins." So it was, you know, compared to like other projects that I've been on, and I imagine other people have been on, like it became a much less scary prospect. It's like, "Oh, I've broken the build, but what do I need to do? Oh, I just need to remember this one thing that I forgot." You know, like it.
Right. Rather than investigating for hours or
panicking and us having to like roll stuff back or anything crazy like that. Like, no, it's just like, it was simple.
It's nice to see it from the perspective of other members of the team. That's really interesting.
I think, just a load of kudos to Andrew for driving that, because he's such a gracious, patient man. Thank you.
We saw the build server as like another team member was there, not to. There was. You didn't want to break the build on purpose, but there was no shame to breaking the build. It was just.
It was never the end of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And when you hit a build, does it? Sorry, I think I might have said this, but does it run the test every time you build, or do you run the test and then build, or is it an automatic? Are they tied together? They're
tied together. So when you start a build job on the server, it will actually launch as Unity 3 times. So it will launch to run the enemy's test, the level test, and then the player test. And then finally, if all those are passing, then it will launch the Unity a final time to make the actual build.
Okay.
And so you can't actually get a build unless you've got all the tests passing. And we did that on purpose because it's very easy. If you allow the build server to just succeed and just leave the test failures as warnings, they won't get fixed. Yeah. They'll just be, there was a pressing deadline, we had to leave it like it was, or someone's gone home for the day, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But instead it was very much like nothing's going to happen unless these tests are passing. So we have to keep them clean all the time.
It's nice. It's a restriction you added to yourself to create a sense of urgency to the problem. Okay, that's nice.
Yep.
Yeah, I like it.
And it's also very easy, like, to grab people's attention as well. If you're saying there's a test failing here, it's one thing. But if you're saying the build's down, the build server's broken, then
I was saying, like, it wasn't the end of the world, but like you definitely feel that pressure. It's like, let's not deny.
So there's a couple of other really nice tools you can use in Unity's testing tools. So one of them is generating tests. So here we've got these enemy lifetime tests, and each one of them is identical. So you can see one of them is the jump, one of them is the laser enemy, and each of them have identical tests here. But I didn't write the same tests 6 times for each enemy. In the code, NUnit has this concept of a provider. So here we're defining, this is our test fixture, and we're saying it's a source, and then please, here's the class that gives you everything you need. And then this class here, all it does is iterate the asset database and find every single enemy that we can find. and then it provides it to enemy lifetime tests. Enemy lifetime tests gets the enemy ID as a constructor, and then it stores it, and then our tests run relative to that. So we spawn enemies relative to that parameter that we've been given. And from the UI's point of view, it generates all these different versions for you. So it meant that when we were making the new enemies, we could just make a new enemy, and then these tests would automatically start appearing. And even if you hadn't gone as far as to write many jump enemy tests yet, you had that fallback of, if we watch them run, we have the fallback of these very simple life cycles of, can the enemy spawn? And this is, can the enemy spawn without errors? Can you hurt it without errors? Can you kill it without errors? And will it despawn without errors? And if someone was coming to automated testing for the first time, these are some great places to get a lot of bang for buck of, not is it doing specific behaviors, but can I do something generic to it without errors in the log? And if there's no errors in the log, we can assume things are at least roughly functional. And we use that to great effect. We're going to see it. We're going to see the enemy spawn now. Some of them spawn off in the distance because we actually don't want them to engage the player. The player is here as like a ancillary side effect. And you see they're very fast. They're just jumping into the scene. We're spawning in, and so fast, in fact, I can't get it in the scene view. Is that the player or the... Yeah, that's the enemy. Spawning in, and then, killing the enemy, making sure there's no errors. Waiting for them to despawn, and then we'll be on to the next test. We don't have to watch all of those. This is great for enemies, but it's amazing for levels. If you've got a game with static levels, like we do, then you can write another generator, another provider, which we called level smoke test. And this provider just goes and asks the game, give me all the levels, and we actually trim a few out. We don't want to test some of those playgrounds that you were saying. We don't really care if they're failing or not. And then provides them to another fixture. And that looks like this. Looks like the level smoke tests. So we get any time a designer added a new level and put it in the game, the next time the game was building, the build server was already testing that level.
Oh, okay.
It just automatically made, because it turns up in the build list and then it automatically makes tests. And all these do is make sure that we load, that we run, that some of our scenes have narrative scenes. Can we skip past a narrative scene? And then it unloads. If I was doing this, if and when we do a sequel, I'd really like Kara to be the player character to be able to run around the scene a little bit. These are just basically loading up, and then we press forward on the stick to just get Kara moving, but nothing else really gets tested. But this validates a whole bunch of stuff. Like we were having, we would get occasional bugs like the players spawning off the floor and then falling through the world, or
I see.
There's a bad texture on this asset, which is only spitting like a very small error into the log. And if we were making a build, probably QA wouldn't even notice this, right? They wouldn't notice there's a bad texture on this one thing in the corner of the map. They might not notice for days and days and days that that's happening. But the build server can know straight away and then fail the build and say, there's a missing material here. Someone should go and fix this straight away. And that meant that our levels were always level 10. Didn't have to wait for QA to get all the way through the game and say, actually, level 10 loads now. We knew straight away level 10 loads without errors every single time. So it was really valuable.
We all know, making games can be very time consuming and can be expensive. So I wonder, do you feel like implementing something like this can reduce the QA cost, for example, or both time and monetary for walking through a game? Or
it's less that it's reducing your QA costs, and it's more that it's freeing them up to look at really interesting bugs. You can get them now looking for repros for issues that are really hard to reproduce, trying to get those repros better. Once they've given you the good repros, you can then go put them in a test. But getting them to explore for you, getting them to find more complex interactions that you haven't got automated tests for, is extremely useful. I think there was definitely some worried faces in QA when I started introducing this, but by the end of the project, they all loved it.
It definitely adds that value, right? And we've got such a great QA team, and it allowed them to really stress the game, because otherwise they would have been spending all that time testing all that stuff, looking for that one dodgy texture, right?
Right. And then they can focus on other things. So it elevates the level of polish of the final product, really.
Yes.
Rather than just speeding it up. Amazing. Yeah.
The last area where the testing framework can help you, so we'll be looking at play mode tests so far. It has to boot the game, it runs the game, runs your coroutine, quits. These are obviously very time consuming. We spend as much time as is reasonable making these tests run quickly, making sure we can get to the point where the failure is happening fast and then recognize that failure and then pass the test. But they're still time consuming. All of these tests, you can see there's almost 800, and they take about an hour to run on our build servers. So that's on top of the about an hour to build a console build. So you've got 2 hours turnaround to run to make your builds. But the edit mode tests, you can make these happen really quickly. These happen without booting the game at all. And that means these can run every single time you push. So not just when we're making a build, but anytime anyone makes any change to the game, we can run all of these edit mode tests on the server and see if anything's changed. And the type of stuff we can test for varies. So we can run more what a traditional programmer will call a unit test, where the coder is trying to verify just this exact bit of functionality is working. In like this single branch inside this deep function works as expected, and we can write one test to explore that and then make sure that's passing. So these are running code tests on the trick sequencer, which is reading your inputs from your pad. So reading the fact that you've pressed left grab and given you a left grab trick. But it's actually way more complicated than you think. You could do a whole talk just on how complicated trick input is, because we implemented that initially as like, you press left, you press grab, here's your left grab. And all the designers were saying it's broken, it doesn't work. And it's technically working, but what they were doing is doing grab left. And they can't tell, right? To them, they did left grab, but they're so close together, actually the computer read grab left first. So we have to put in all these little input windows to make sure that you can actually shuffle these things around. And you don't want to break one of those when you're fixing another one of those little input windows. So it's really vital to have all of these input tests here. And you can see those run extremely fast. Those run in less than 2 seconds. Most of that was actually serializing Unity state and then running these in a deserializing state. They probably run more like fraction of a second per test. But then you can also do validation tests. So we've got a whole bunch of validation tests here. You saw the smoke tests where you run into a level and you just load it. All we're doing is loading it and checking if there's any errors. Whereas these validation tests are loading it in editor and then can check a bunch of specific things. So we had a bug, for instance, where the exploding barrel should have been marked dynamic and it was marked static. So now we can have a test here that loads the level and makes sure that every single barrel is marked dynamic every single time the level gets loaded. That should load it very quickly and then tell us. It should load it in the editor. So there you go. It loaded it in the editor and then came back to us. That ran in 4 seconds. The challenge data is all in sync. We haven't accidentally snuck a prefab that shouldn't be here into this scene. We've got the correct number of spawn checkpoints. The player spawn point has the right start. Everything's got valid rotations. All this stuff we can, as we get issues, we can chuck these into the validators, and then these happen every time anyone pushes, and we can know that all the levels these are more like top down. These very specific things are working, whereas the play mode tests that you saw are very bottom up. Like in general, is everything working together? Yeah. So you need both of them. You need both edit and play mode tests to have a good coverage. But yeah, they're both really important tools.
Amazing. Honestly, thank you for the deep overview and dive into the testing. It's the first time on one of these streams that we actually see a studio that showcase how they've used the testing framework to such detail, or at all, really.
It sounds like every game can benefit from using this.
Exactly.
No matter, especially the generic ones, like just loading a level and checking if there's any error. And I had never heard of this testing framework, so thank you very much, Andrew, for showing this to us.
It's a really good point.
Welcome.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the things can be very game specific, but this is something that really can apply to any absolutely. Yeah, that's such a. So hopefully, when we share this online, more people will become aware of it and start to use them more. Awesome. Well, thank you all for the amazing insight into the game. This was amazing. I'm going to say it again one more time. Go wishlist the game on Steam. I'm dropping a link in the chat right now, hitting enter. Boom. Check it out. There's a Rollerdrome on Steam. It's coming out Tuesday next week. Absolutely fantastic game. So much fun. Clearly, so much love was put into the design of the game. There's a level of detail that's absolutely impeccable that was showcased here on the stream. If you want to see more streams like this, make sure to follow us right here on Twitch, where we're streaming weekly. We'll do more interviews like this. We'll do Let's Dev streams where we deep dive into Unity features like the testing framework, like shader graph, like VFX graph, all that kind of stuff. So make sure to follow us here. And Joyce, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. And please, I hope you come back more often. Andrew, Alina, Jacob, again, thank you so much for so much of your time. This was really fantastic. It's great to meet you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, it was
Thank
awesome.
you.